I woke up to white ceiling tiles and the smell of disinfectant. My head felt heavy, like someone had filled it with cotton and stones at the same time. I tried to move my arms, but they felt weighted down, sluggish. When I finally managed to lift my right hand, I saw the bruise circling my wrist. Purple and yellow, like someone had grabbed me too hard or held me down. I blinked slowly, trying to piece together where I was. The walls were pale green. There was a window, but it had that frosted glass you couldn't see through. No curtains. A single chair sat in the corner, plastic and utilitarian. The door had a small window reinforced with wire mesh. This wasn't a hotel room. This wasn't my apartment. I sat up too quickly and the room tilted. My stomach lurched. I pressed my hand against my temple and tried to remember. There had been something important. Something I was supposed to do today. The wedding. The thought hit me like cold water. My wedding was today. This morning. I was supposed to wake up in the bridal suite at the Ashford estate, surrounded by bridesmaids and champagne, and that specific kind of controlled chaos that happens before a ceremony. Instead, I was here. Wherever here was. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. I was wearing hospital clothes. Thin cotton pants and a matching top, both pale blue. My feet were bare. I stood up carefully, testing my balance, and walked to the door. Locked. I knocked. Then I knocked harder. A woman in scrubs appeared on the other side of the window. She looked at me with professional neutrality, the kind of expression that gave nothing away. I need to leave, I said through the door. There's been a mistake. She didn't open it. Someone will be with you shortly. No, you don't understand. I'm getting married today. I need to call someone. I need my phone. Dr. Solace will see you this afternoon. I don't need a doctor. I need to leave. But she was already walking away. I pressed my forehead against the cool metal of the door and tried to think. The last thing I remembered clearly was being at home. My mother's house, technically, though I'd been staying there the week before the wedding because Elliot thought it would be more traditional. More proper. I remembered dinner. Naomi had been there, helping with last-minute details. We'd gone over the seating chart for the reception. Mother had fussed about the flower arrangements, worried they wouldn't match her vision. And then what? There was a gap in my memory, soft and dark like a bruise I couldn't quite see. I sat back down on the bed and noticed my belongings on a small shelf. My clothes from yesterday folded. My watch. My engagement ring. But no phone. I searched the room methodically. Under the bed. In the small bathroom attached to the room. Behind the chair. Nothing. I was about to give up when I heard something. A faint buzzing sound. I froze, listening. It came again. From inside the pillowcase. I pulled it open and found my phone, tucked deep inside. The screen was cracked in one corner, but it still worked. The battery was at 11%. My hands shook as I unlocked it. 47 missed calls. Dozens of messages. But what caught my attention was the notification at the top of the screen. A live stream from the wedding venue. I clicked on it before I could think better of it. The screen filled with images of the Ashford Estate Gardens. White chairs arranged in perfect rows. An arch covered in roses and trailing greenery. Guests in their elegant clothing, chatting and laughing. The ceremony was about to begin. I watched the guests stand as music started. Classical, traditional, the piece we'd chosen together months ago. And then I saw her. Naomi, walking down the aisle in my dress. Not a dress like mine. My dress. The one I'd spent weeks choosing, with the lace sleeves and the low back and the train that took 3 people to bustle properly. She looked beautiful. She looked like a bride. She looked like me, if I'd been just a little bit different. A little more polished. A little more sure of myself. The camera panned to the front, and I saw him. Elliot stood at the altar in his charcoal suit, the one we'd picked out together. His face held that expression I knew so well, composed and distant, like he was watching something interesting but not personally relevant. He was supposed to be looking at me that way. Instead, he was watching my sister walk toward him. I couldn't breathe. I sat there on that hospital bed, holding my cracked phone, watching my wedding happen without me. When Naomi reached the altar, Elliot took her hand. The officiant began to speak. I couldn't hear the words over the rushing sound in my ears, but I didn't need to. I'd written part of those vows myself. The camera zoomed in as the officiant said something that made the guests laugh softly. Elliot smiled, that rare small smile he only showed when he was genuinely pleased. I had spent a year trying to earn that smile. My sister got it by walking down an aisle in my dress. The officiant spoke again, and then I heard the words clearly, carried by the microphone he wore. "You may now kiss the bride." Elliot leaned in. Naomi tilted her face up. And I watched my fiancé kiss my sister. The phone slipped from my hands and hit the floor. The screen went dark, but I could still hear the applause, tinny and distant, before the connection cut out. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, I picked up the phone and turned it off to save what little battery remained. I needed to think. I needed to understand what was happening. But every time I tried to piece it together, my mind kept circling back to the same image. Naomi in my dress. Elliot's hand on her waist. The kiss that should have been mine. Someone knocked on the door and I looked up. A different woman this time, older, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had kind eyes and carried a tablet. She opened the door and stepped inside, leaving it slightly ajar behind her. "Zariah," she said. "I'm Dr. Solace. How are you feeling?" "How am I feeling?" I heard my voice rise, sharp and unfamiliar. "I just watched my sister marry my fiancé while I'm locked in here. How do you think I'm feeling?" Dr. Solace sat down in the plastic chair and regarded me carefully. "I understand you're confused and upset. That's completely natural given the circumstances." "What circumstances? Why am I here? Who brought me here?" "You were admitted last night under the care of Dr. Brennan from Clearview Private Health. Do you remember speaking with him?" I shook my head. "I don't remember anything after dinner." "That's likely due to the sedative you were given. It can cause temporary memory loss." She made a note on her tablet. "Your mother and sister felt you were in crisis. They were concerned for your safety." "My safety?" "They reported that you were experiencing a severe emotional episode, making accusations, threatening to hurt yourself." "That's not true. None of that is true." Dr. Solace looked at me with those kind eyes, and I saw something there that made me pause. Not dismissal exactly. Something more like careful observation. "Tell me what you remember," she said. So I did. I told her about the wedding planning. About Elliot and how we'd met 2 years ago at a charity gala. How he'd pursued me with the same focused intensity he brought to building his company. How my mother had been thrilled, finally proud of me for once. I told her about Naomi, my younger sister by 3 years, who'd always been the favorite. The charming one. The one who knew how to make people love her without trying. I told her about the dinner last night, about going over final details, about how normal everything had seemed. And then, Dr. Solace prompted. And then nothing. I don't remember. She made another note. "Zariah, do you know how rare it is for someone to be admitted to psychiatric care without a formal evaluation?" I looked at her sharply. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the paperwork for your admission was rushed. Incomplete in some areas. It was approved by Dr. Brennan, but he's not on staff here. He works for a private clinic that specializes in discreet care for high-profile families. You think something's wrong. I think there are questions that deserve answers." She stood up. "I'm going to make some calls. In the meantime, try to rest. And Zariah, don't let anyone convince you that what you saw wasn't real." After she left, I lay back down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. My whole life, I'd been told I was too sensitive, too suspicious, too quick to see problems where there were none. When I was 7, Naomi broke my favorite doll and told Mother I'd done it myself in a fit of anger. Mother believed her. When I protested, I was sent to my room for lying. When I was 14, Naomi copied my essay for English class and turned it in as her own. When I told the teacher, Naomi cried and said I was jealous of her better grade. The teacher gave us both detention for disrupting class, but somehow I was the one who ended up apologizing. When I was 22 and got my first serious job, Naomi told everyone at a family dinner that I'd only been hired because I'd flirted with the interviewer. It wasn't true, but the way she said it, laughing and light, made it sound like a joke. Mother had smiled and said something about me finally learning to use my assets. I'd learned over the years that fighting back only made things worse. That objecting meant being labeled difficult, emotional, unstable. So I'd stopped fighting. I'd learned to doubt myself instead. When Elliot started pulling away 6 months into our engagement, becoming more distant and distracted, I wondered if I was imagining it. When he canceled date nights to work late, I told myself I was being needy. When he stopped touching me casually, the small gestures of affection that used to come naturally, I assumed I was reading too much into it. When Naomi started spending more time with us, inserting herself into our plans, I felt uneasy but couldn't articulate why. She was just being supportive, everyone said. Just trying to help with the wedding planning. When I mentioned to Mother that something felt off, that Elliot seemed different, she'd patted my hand and said wedding stress affected everyone. That I should be grateful to have found someone like him. That I shouldn't sabotage my own happiness with unnecessary worry. So I'd swallowed the unease. I'd smiled through the engagement photos. I'd pretended everything was fine. And now I was here, locked in a psychiatric facility, while my sister wore my dress and married my fiancé. I turned on my phone again, careful with the dwindling battery. I scrolled through the messages, most of them from people asking where I was, if I was okay, what was happening. There was nothing from Elliot. Nothing from Naomi. Nothing from Mother. But there was one message from a number I didn't recognize. I heard what happened. Call me when you can. IR. IR. Isaac Rowan. I stared at those initials for a long time. I hadn't spoken to Isaac in 3 years. Hadn't even thought about him in months. But seeing his name now felt like finding solid ground in the middle of drowning. I'd met Isaac during what Mother still referred to as my unfortunate phase. I'd been 25, working at a nonprofit that helped women navigate the legal system after leaving abusive relationships. It was fulfilling work, but emotionally exhausting, and Mother hated that I'd taken it instead of joining Naomi at her marketing firm. Isaac had been consulting on a case. A woman whose family had tried to have her declared incompetent so they could control her inheritance. He was an investigative psychiatrist, someone who specialized in cases where mental health diagnoses were used as weapons. We'd worked together for 6 months on that case. We won. The woman got her freedom and her money, and her family lost their power over her. Isaac had asked me to dinner afterward, and I'd almost said yes. But Mother had introduced me to a friend's son that same week, someone suitable and wealthy, and I'd let myself be pulled in that direction instead. I'd thought about Isaac sometimes over the years. Wondered what might have been different if I'd made other choices. But I'd buried those thoughts the same way I buried everything else that didn't fit the story I was supposed to be living. Now, sitting in this locked room, I looked at his message and felt something shift inside me. I'd spent my whole life waiting for permission. Permission to be angry. Permission to trust myself. Permission to believe that what I felt and saw and knew was real. I was done waiting. I turned off the phone to save the battery and tucked it back into the pillowcase. Then I lay down and started planning. Dr. Solis returned in the late afternoon with another woman, this one wearing a visitor's badge. She introduced herself as a patient advocate and said she was there to review my case. They asked me questions. Had I been experiencing thoughts of self-harm? Had I made threats? Had I been sleeping, eating, functioning normally? I answered carefully, aware that everything I said would be documented and used to justify either my release or my continued detention. No, I had not wanted to hurt myself. No, I had not made threats. Yes, I had been functioning normally until I'd been brought here against my will. The advocate made notes and exchanged a glance with Dr. Solis. We're going to recommend a full evaluation, the advocate said, independent of Dr. Brennan. It should take a day or two to arrange. I don't have a day or two. My wedding was this morning. My life is happening without me. I understand your frustration, Dr. Solis said gently. But rushing this won't help you. We need to build a proper case for your release. After they left, I paced the small room. I thought about Elliot and Naomi, probably at the reception now. Dancing. Cutting cake. Accepting congratulations. I thought about Mother, who'd probably orchestrated all of this. Who'd always been better at protecting her image than protecting her daughter. I thought about how neatly I'd been erased. No dramatic confrontation. No messy scene. Just a quiet removal, justified by concern and medical authority. It was almost elegant. That night, I used the last of my phone's battery to call Isaac. He answered on the second ring. Zariah. Just my name, but the way he said it made my throat tight. How did you know? I asked. Dr. Solis called me. She thought you might need someone who understood this kind of situation. You know her? We've worked together before. She's one of the good ones. He paused. Tell me what happened. So I did. All of it. The wedding. Naomi. The locked room. The gap in my memory. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. This isn't random, he finally said. This kind of thing requires planning. Coordination. Someone had to find a complicit doctor, arrange the admission, forge the necessary paperwork. You think my mother did this? I think your mother enabled it. But I don't think she planned it alone. Naomi. Possibly. Or Elliot. Or all of them together. His voice was calm, analytical. The question is why now? Why go to these lengths instead of just calling off the wedding? I'd been asking myself the same thing. Control, I said slowly. If they just canceled the wedding, people would ask questions. There would be gossip. This way, I'm the problem. I'm the one who had a breakdown. They're the victims of my instability. And if anyone questions why Elliot married your sister so quickly, they'll say he couldn't abandon the family. That he stepped in to help. That it was the noble thing to do. Exactly. I closed my eyes. My phone was almost dead, the screen dimming. Isaac, I need help. I need to get out of here, and I need to prove what they did. I'm already working on it. Dr. Solis is filing for an independent evaluation. I'm looking into Dr. Brennan and his clinic. And I'm making some calls about the timeline of events last night. What kind of calls? The kind that might show this wasn't a spontaneous decision to seek help for you. The kind that might prove premeditation. The phone died before I could respond. I sat in the dark room and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. The next morning, Mother came to visit. She arrived dressed in pale pink, perfectly put together, carrying a small handbag. She looked concerned and tired, like she'd been up all night worrying. I'm sure she had been practicing that expression. Darling, she said, sitting in the plastic chair. How are you feeling? I looked at her and saw a stranger. Someone I'd spent my whole life trying to please, trying to win approval from, trying to make proud. Someone who'd thrown me away the moment I became inconvenient. I'm feeling like I was drugged and committed against my will, I said evenly. I'm feeling like I watched my sister marry my fiancé while I was locked in here. How are you feeling, Mother? She flinched slightly. Zariah, I know you're upset. But you have to understand, we were so worried about you. The things you were saying, the way you were acting. What was I saying? You were making wild accusations, claiming Naomi was trying to steal Elliot, saying we were all conspiring against you. She shook her head sadly. It was heartbreaking to see you like that. I don't remember saying any of that. That's because you were in crisis. Dr. Brennan said you might not remember. The mind protects itself from trauma. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to make her see what she'd done. But I'd learned something over the years. I'd learned that Mother only heard what she wanted to hear. That arguing with her was like arguing with smoke. So instead, I asked a different question. When did you call Dr. Brennan? She blinked. What? When did you call him? Last night, during dinner, when I was supposedly having this crisis. Yes, during dinner. Or right after. And he came right away? Well, we'd been talking to him for a few days before that. Just in case. You'd been so stressed about the wedding, we wanted to have support available if you needed it. There it was. The admission that this had been planned in advance. And the venue? I asked. The wedding was supposed to be this morning. Did someone call them last night to say I wouldn't be there? Or did you wait until this morning? Mother's expression flickered. Naomi handled all of that. She was so strong through this whole ordeal. She insisted we shouldn't cancel everything just because you were unwell. She said you'd want the celebration to go forward. So she married Elliot instead. He was distraught about what happened to you. Naomi comforted him. Things just developed naturally. In less than 12 hours. Love doesn't follow a timeline, Zariah. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound came out harsh and broken, and Mother looked genuinely alarmed. Darling, please. You're not well. You need to let us help you. I need you to leave. Zariah, get out. Now. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. I'll come back when you're feeling more rational. Dr. Brennan says these episodes can last several days. After she left, I sat very still and let the rage wash through me. I'd spent my whole life making myself smaller, quieter, more palatable. I'd apologized for things I hadn't done. I'd doubted my own perceptions. I'd twisted myself into shapes that might finally earn love and acceptance. And none of it had mattered. Because the moment I became inconvenient, I was discarded. Dr. Solace came by that afternoon with news. The independent evaluation is scheduled for tomorrow morning, she said. Dr. Patricia Chan from the State Psychiatric Board. She's thorough and fair. Will that be enough to get me released? If she finds no evidence of acute psychiatric crisis, yes. The hold was based on Dr. Brennan's assessment, and if that assessment is contradicted by an independent professional, they'll have to release you. And then what? I'm free to go home and watch my sister play house with my fiancé. Dr. Solace sat down. Then you decide what comes next. But Zariah, you need to understand something. Even if you get out, even if you prove they manipulated the situation, you can't undo what happened. The wedding took place. Whatever legal or financial arrangements were made are binding. I'm not trying to undo it, I said. I'm trying to understand it. Why? I thought about that. Because I need to know it wasn't my fault. I need to know I wasn't crazy to feel what I felt. She nodded slowly. That's fair. And for what it's worth, I don't think you're crazy at all. I think you're someone who's been systematically taught to doubt herself. After she left, I thought about Elliot. We'd met at a charity gala for children's literacy. I'd been there representing the nonprofit where I worked. He'd been there because his company had donated a significant sum, and he was expected to make an appearance. We'd ended up at the bar at the same time, both trying to escape tedious conversations. He'd made a dry comment about corporate philanthropy, and I'd laughed. We'd talked for 2 hours. He'd seemed different then. More present. More interested. Or maybe I just wanted to see him that way. He'd pursued me with focus and intensity. Flowers delivered to my office. Reservations at restaurants I'd mentioned wanting to try. Weekend trips to places I'd said sounded beautiful. It had felt like being chosen. Looking back, I wondered if it had felt like being hunted. 6 months into dating, he'd proposed. It was at another gala, this one for medical research. He'd arranged for the proposal to happen on stage, in front of 500 people. I'd said yes because saying no would have been impossible in front of all those witnesses. I'd told myself I was lucky, that this was what love looked like when you were an adult. Strategic. Practical. Built on compatibility rather than passion. I'd ignored the voice that said I felt more like an acquisition than a partner. I'd ignored a lot of things. The engagement had been a whirlwind of planning and appearances. Mother had taken over most of the decisions, insisting she knew best. Naomi had inserted herself as my maid of honor, even though we'd never been particularly close. Elliot had become more distant, more distracted. He'd blamed work stress, a new product launch, investor pressure. I'd blamed myself for expecting too much. And now I was here, and they were there, and I couldn't stop wondering when exactly it had all been decided. Had it been weeks ago? Months? Had they been planning this while I was choosing flowers and writing vows? The thought made me feel sick. Dr. Chin arrived the next morning exactly on time. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She spent 3 hours with me, asking questions, listening to my answers, taking notes. She didn't seem interested in what Dr. Brennan had written. She seemed interested in what I had to say. At the end, she closed her notebook and looked at me directly. Ms. Kingsley, I see no evidence of acute psychiatric distress. No signs of psychosis, mania, or suicidal ideation. What I do see is someone who's been through a significant trauma and who has every right to be angry and confused. So I can leave? I'm recommending your immediate release. The hold was unjustified based on my evaluation. I felt something loosen in my chest. Thank you. You should know, she continued, that I'll be filing a report about Dr. Brennan's conduct. Emergency psychiatric holds are serious interventions, not tools for family convenience. After she left, Dr. Solis helped me gather my things. What will you do now? She asked. I don't know yet. You have somewhere to go? I thought about my apartment, the one I'd been slowly packing up to move into the house Elliot had bought for us. I have a place, I said. She handed me a card. That's my personal number. If you need anything, call me. And Zariah? Don't let them make you small again. I left the facility in the same clothes I'd arrived in, wrinkled and slept in. I took a car service to my apartment and stood in the doorway for a long moment before going inside. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Half-packed boxes. Wedding magazines on the coffee table. A dress I'd bought for the rehearsal dinner hanging on the bedroom door. I sat down on the couch and finally let myself cry. Not delicate tears. Not quiet sadness. Full-body sobs that felt like they were tearing something loose inside me. I cried for the wedding that didn't happen. I cried for the relationship that had never been what I thought it was. I cried for all the years I'd spent trying to be good enough, trying to earn love that was always conditional. And then I stopped crying and called Isaac. He arrived an hour later carrying takeout containers and a folder full of documents. You look terrible, he said. Thanks. I mean it as a compliment. You look like someone who stopped pretending everything's fine. We sat at my kitchen table and ate Chinese food while he showed me what he'd found. Dr. Brennan's clinic had a history of questionable commitments, usually involving wealthy families who wanted inconvenient relatives handled discreetly. There were 3 active complaints against him with the medical board. The sedative I'd been given had been administered by a private nurse who'd come to the house. She worked for the same clinic. And the timeline of the wedding change was damning. The venue was notified 4 days ago that there would be a change to the bride's name, Isaac said. For days, Zariah. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. I stared at the documents. They were planning to replace me before they ever locked me up. The commitment was insurance. A way to explain your absence. A way to discredit you if you tried to fight back. And Elliot? Isaac's expression was carefully neutral. His name is on some of the paperwork. Authorization for the venue change. Payment for Dr. Brennan's services. So he knew. He knew. I'd suspected it, but confirmation was different. It made it real. Elliot hadn't been a victim of circumstance or my sister's manipulation. He'd been an active participant. What's my recourse? I asked. Legally, I mean. That's complicated. The wedding is legal. Any prenuptial agreements he had with you are void. Assets he might have promised you don't have to be transferred. In terms of the commitment, you could file complaints against Dr. Brennan, but that's a long process with uncertain outcomes. So they win. They got what they wanted. That's not the same as winning. I pushed food around my container. Then what do I do? What do you want to do? I thought about that. Part of me wanted to rage. To go to their house and scream. To tell everyone who would listen what they'd done. But a larger part of me felt tired. Tired of fighting for scraps of love. Tired of proving myself to people who would never see me clearly. Tired of living in a story someone else had written. I want them to know, I said finally. I want them to understand that I see exactly what they did. And then I want to walk away. Isaac nodded. That's fair. Over the next week, I put my life in order. I broke the lease on my apartment and found a new place across town, somewhere Mother had never been. I packed up my things carefully, leaving behind anything connected to Elliot or the wedding. I called the nonprofit where I used to work and asked if they had any positions available. They did. I took it. I changed my phone number and gave the new one only to people I trusted. And then I sent 3 letters. The first went to Elliot. I didn't write much. Just a few lines stating that I knew the timeline of events. That I knew he'd been planning to marry Naomi before I was ever committed. That I hoped he'd gotten what he wanted. I didn't sign it with love or even my name. Just my initials. The second went to Naomi. I wrote more to her. I told her I remembered everything now, including things I'd forgotten or chosen not to see. The time she'd worn my perfume on a date with Elliot before we were engaged. The way she'd always found reasons to stop by when he was at my apartment. The text messages I'd seen on her phone once, quickly hidden, that had seemed off. I told her I understood she'd wanted what I had. I told her she was welcome to it. I told her I hoped it made her happy. I meant it. Not out of kindness, but out of genuine indifference. The third letter went to Mother. That one was the hardest to write. I went through a dozen drafts before I settled on something simple. I wrote that I forgave her for choosing the daughter who was easier to love. I wrote that I understood she'd built her whole identity around appearances and couldn't risk the scandal of a canceled wedding. I wrote that I didn't blame her for being who she was. And I wrote that I wouldn't be available for family gatherings anymore. That I needed distance to build a life that was actually mine. I didn't ask for understanding or approval. I just stated facts. I mailed all 3 letters on the same day and then blocked their numbers. Isaac took me to dinner that night. How do you feel? He asked. Lighter, I said. And I meant it. We talked about other things. His current cases. My new job. A documentary he'd watched about wrongful psychiatric commitments. It felt normal. Easy. At the end of dinner, he walked me to my car. Thank you, I said. For everything. For believing me. For helping me see clearly. You would have seen it eventually. You're smarter than they ever gave you credit for. Maybe. But it helped to have someone confirm I wasn't imagining things. He smiled. You're going to be okay, Zariah. I think I am. I drove home to my new apartment and sat on my couch in the quiet. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. 6 months later, I was sitting in my office at the nonprofit when I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Zariah Kingsley? A woman's voice, young and uncertain. Yes. My name is Sophie. I got your name from Dr. Solace. She said you might be able to help me. Help you with what? My family is trying to have me committed. They say I'm having delusions, but I'm not. I just found out some things they don't want me to know. About money. About their plans for me. I felt something click into place. Tell me what's happening, I said. She did. And as I listened, I took notes and asked questions and felt something I hadn't expected. Purpose. After we hung up, I called Isaac. I think I want to do this more formally, I said. Help people in situations like mine. People being gaslit by their families. People who need someone to believe them. That's a good idea. Would you help me? With the psychiatric side of things. He was quiet for a moment. I'd like that. We started small. I worked with a nonprofit during the day and took on private cases in the evening. People Dr. Solace referred to me. People who'd been labeled difficult or unstable when they'd really just been inconvenient. Isaac consulted on cases that involved medical coercion. He taught me how to spot the signs, how to document evidence, how to build a case that would hold up under scrutiny. We won more often than we lost. And slowly, I built something I'd never had before. A life that felt like mine. I didn't hear from Naomi or Elliot directly, but I heard about them. They'd moved to a house in the suburbs. They appeared at charity events. They looked happy in photographs. I felt nothing when I saw their pictures. Not anger. Not pain. Not even curiosity. Just a mild interest, the way you might feel about strangers. Mother tried to reach out once, about a year after I'd sent the letter. She showed up at my office unannounced. I saw her through the glass door and felt my stomach tighten. But I didn't feel the old pull to please her, to make her comfortable, to smooth over the discomfort. I went outside to meet her. Zariah, she said. You look well. Thank you. I was hoping we could talk. Perhaps have lunch. I don't think that's a good idea. Please. I'm your mother. I miss you. I looked at her and saw someone I used to know. Someone I'd spent my whole childhood trying to impress. Someone whose approval I'd craved more than anything. And I felt sad for both of us. Sad for her because she'd chosen image over connection and would probably never understand what she'd lost. Sad for the younger version of me who'd thought that love was something you earned through perfection. I'm sorry, Mother, but I need to protect my peace. I hope you can understand that. I went back inside before she could respond. Through the glass, I watched her stand there for a moment, looking uncertain and small. Then she straightened her shoulders, adjusted her purse, and walked away. I didn't cry. I just sat down at my desk and got back to work. 2 years after the wedding that wasn't mine, I opened a small consultation practice. It wasn't grand or flashy. Just a quiet office in a converted brownstone with a simple sign outside. I specialized in cases where mental health labels were being misused. Where families weaponized psychiatric diagnoses. Where people needed someone to believe them when everyone else said they were imagining things. Isaac worked with me part-time, handling the medical evaluations and expert testimony. Dr. Solace sent referrals regularly. We helped people document gaslighting, challenged unjust commitments, connected victims with lawyers who understood coercive control. It wasn't always successful. Some people weren't ready to leave. Some families had too much power. Some systems were too broken to fight. But we tried. And sometimes we won. One afternoon, I was working on case files when my assistant knocked on the door. There's someone here to see you. No appointment. She says it's urgent. I almost said no, but something about the way she said it made me curious. Send her in. The woman who entered was younger than me. Maybe mid-20s. She had that look I'd come to recognize. Exhausted but determined. Scared but trying not to show it. Thank you for seeing me, she said. I know you're busy, but I didn't know where else to go. Sit down. Tell me what's happening. She sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. My family says I'm having a breakdown. That I need help. They've already called a doctor. Someone who specializes in difficult cases. What's the doctor's name? Brennan. Dr. Brennan. I felt ice in my veins. When did they contact him? Yesterday. He's supposed to come to the house tomorrow for an evaluation. But I found emails between my mother and my sister. They've been planning this for weeks. They want me out of the way because I inherited money from my grandmother, and they think I'm going to waste it. Do you have copies of the emails? She pulled out her phone. I took screenshots. I looked through them. The language was familiar. The same justifications. The same concern masking control. You did the right thing coming here, I said. We're going to help you. I called Isaac. Then Dr. Solace. Then a lawyer I trusted. By the time Dr. Brennan showed up at her house the next day, we were ready. Dr. Solace was there as an independent psychiatric observer. The lawyer had already filed protective documentation. Isaac had contacted the medical board with our compiled evidence of Dr. Brennan's pattern of behavior. The woman was never committed. Her family was furious. But she kept her freedom and her inheritance, and 6 months later, she sent me a card thanking me for believing her. I kept it on my desk. Not as a trophy. As a reminder that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is trust yourself. That walking away doesn't mean giving up. That building a new life is better than fighting for a place in someone else's story. I thought about my own story sometimes. About the wedding that happened without me. About Elliot and Naomi, wherever they were now. About Mother and her careful image. I didn't hate them. Hate required energy I didn't want to spend. I just felt grateful that I'd found my way out. That I'd learned to recognize my own worth instead of waiting for someone else to assign it to me. That I discovered I didn't need their love or approval to build something meaningful. On the 3rd anniversary of the day I woke up in that locked room, I took myself to dinner. Not anywhere fancy. Just a small restaurant I liked with good food and low lighting. I ordered wine and pasta and sat alone at a table by the window. Halfway through my meal, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. I saw your practice listed online. I wanted to reach out and say I'm proud of what you're doing. You were always stronger than anyone gave you credit for. Take care of yourself. E. Elliot. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond. To ask him why. To demand explanations I'd never gotten. But I'd learned something over the past 3 years. Some questions don't have satisfying answers. Some people will never take responsibility for their choices. And seeking closure from someone who hurt you is like asking them to heal wounds they inflicted. I deleted the message. Then I finished my dinner, paid the bill, and walked home through the cool evening air. When I got to my apartment, I made tea and sat on my couch with a book I'd been meaning to read. The silence felt comfortable. The solitude felt like peace. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, entirely myself. Not the version I thought people wanted. Not the polished, palatable version that might earn approval. Just me. Flawed and messy and still figuring things out. But mine. Completely mine. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a conference on coercive control and psychiatric abuse. I almost said no. Public speaking wasn't something I enjoyed, and talking about my own experience felt exposing. But Isaac convinced me. People need to hear this, he said. Not as a victim story. As a survivor story. So I agreed. The conference was small, mostly professionals who worked in mental health and advocacy. I spoke for 20 minutes about recognizing the weaponization of psychiatric diagnoses. About the importance of believing people when they say something is wrong. About the long-term damage of systematic gaslighting. I didn't mention Elliot or Naomi or Mother by name. I didn't need to. The patterns were universal enough that everyone in the room understood. After my talk, several people came up to thank me. To share their own stories. To ask for advice on cases they were working on. One woman waited until everyone else had left. She was older, maybe in her 60s, well-dressed and composed. That was very brave, she said. Thank you. I wanted to apologize. I looked at her more closely and felt recognition dawn. Dr. Brennan's wife. I didn't know what he was doing, she continued. Not the full extent. When the medical board started investigating, I looked through his files. I saw your name. I saw the others. So many others. Why are you telling me this? Because he's losing his license. Because he deserves to. And because I wanted you to know that what he did to you mattered. That it had consequences. I didn't know what to say. She handed me a card. I've started a foundation for victims of medical coercion. If you ever want to be involved, we'd be honored to have you. After she left, I stood in the empty conference room and felt something shift. Not healing exactly. Healing wasn't linear or complete, but something like vindication. Like proof that speaking up had mattered. I kept working. I helped people untangle themselves from toxic family systems. I testified in court cases. I wrote articles for professional journals about recognizing patterns of psychological abuse. And slowly, I built a reputation. Not as Elliot Vale's almost wife. Not as Lucinda Kingsley's disappointing daughter. But as myself. As someone who understood what it felt like to be systematically told you couldn't trust your own mind. As someone who'd found her way back to herself and was helping others do the same. 5 years after the wedding, I got a call from Naomi. I'd changed my number twice since cutting contact, but somehow she'd found me. I stared at her name on my screen for a long moment before answering. Hello. Zariah. It's me. I know. A pause. Then I wanted to talk. If you're willing. About what? About what happened. About what I did. I walked to my window and looked out at the city. Why no? Because I'm not happy. Because nothing turned out the way I thought it would. Because I've been in therapy for 2 years and my therapist says I need to make amends. I almost laughed. Your therapist thinks calling me will make you feel better? No. She thinks I owe you an apology. And she's right. I waited. I'm sorry, Zariah. For all of it. For taking Elliot. For helping Mother commit you. For every cruel thing I did when we were growing up. I was jealous of you, and I handled it in the worst possible way. The apology felt genuine. It also felt insufficient. Thank you for saying that, I said carefully. But I need you to understand something. What you did didn't just hurt me in the moment. It made me doubt myself for years. It made me feel crazy. It taught me that the people who were supposed to love me couldn't be trusted. I know. I'm so sorry. And I've spent the last 5 years building a life where I don't have to wonder if the people around me are lying to me. Where I can trust my own perceptions. Where I feel safe. I understand. Do you? Because forgiving you would mean letting you back into my life. And I don't want to do that. Silence on the other end. I can accept that, she finally said. I just wanted you to know that I recognize what I did. That I regret it. That you weren't wrong about any of it. Thank you for that much. Are you happy? She asked. I mean, truly? I thought about my work. My apartment. My small circle of trusted friends. The quiet life I'd built. Yes, I said. I am. Good. You deserve that. We hung up shortly after. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I just felt neutral. Like closing a book I'd already finished reading. That evening, I met Isaac for coffee. We'd become close over the years, though we'd kept things professional. He was someone I trusted completely, which felt rare and precious. Naomi called, I told him. How did that go? She apologized. I thanked her and said I didn't want a relationship with her. How do you feel about it? Okay, actually. I think I needed to hear her admit it wasn't in my head. But I don't need her in my life to be happy. He smiled. That's growth. I learned from the best. We talked about other things. A new case. Changes at the nonprofit. His niece's graduation. At some point, he said, I'm glad our paths crossed again. Even if the circumstances were terrible. Me too. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd said yes to dinner? Back when we first met. I considered that. Sometimes. But I think I needed to go through what I went through. To learn what I learned. To become who I am now. That's a generous way to look at it. It's the only way I can look at it without being angry forever. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. You're extraordinary. I hope you know that. I smiled. I'm learning. 7 years after the wedding, I gave a talk at a university about my work. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She reminded me of myself at that age. Uncertain but determined. Trying to figure out who she was separate from what people expected her to be. How did you do it? She asked. How did you trust yourself when everyone was telling you that you were wrong? I thought about that question. About all the years I'd spent doubting myself. About the moment I'd decided to stop. I realized that being labeled crazy by people who benefited from my silence wasn't actually evidence that I was crazy, I said. It was evidence that I was onto something. But how did you know the difference? Between actually being wrong and being gaslight? I paid attention to patterns. If everyone who loved me told me I was wrong about something specific, I'd consider their perspective. But when the same people kept telling me I was wrong about everything, that I couldn't trust anything I felt or saw or knew, that was different. That wasn't love. That was control. She nodded slowly. That makes sense. And I found people who didn't have a stake in keeping me small. Who listened without an agenda. Who reflected back what I said without trying to change it. Those people helped me calibrate. Like your doctor friend? Like Dr. Rowan, yes. And Dr. Solace. And eventually others. I built a circle of people I could trust, and that made it easier to trust myself. Thank you, she said. That helps. After she left, I packed up my materials and walked to my car. The evening was cool and clear. I drove home with the windows down, letting the air clear my head. When I got to my apartment, I made dinner and ate it slowly, savoring the quiet. Then I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I'd been working on something for months. A guide for people experiencing family-based coercive control. Practical steps. Warning signs. Resources. I wanted to finish it. I wanted to put everything I'd learned into something that could help others. I worked late into the night, writing and revising until my eyes grew heavy. Before bed, I stood at my window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Naomi and Elliot were living their lives. Somewhere, Mother was maintaining her image. Somewhere, Dr. Brennan was facing the consequences of his actions. And here I was. Still standing. Still growing. Still learning who I could become when I stopped trying to be who everyone else wanted. I slept well that night. Without nightmares. Without regret. Just the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who'd finally come home to herself. In the morning, I woke to sunlight and the sound of birds outside my window. I made coffee and sat on my small balcony, watching the city wake up. My phone buzzed with messages. Case files to review. Speaking invitations to consider. A text from Isaac about lunch later. A full life. A real life. Mine. I sipped my coffee and felt gratitude settle over me like a warm blanket. Not gratitude for what had happened to me, but gratitude for what I'd built from the wreckage. For the strength I'd discovered in myself. For the clarity that came from walking away from people who would never see me clearly. For the peace of knowing I didn't need anyone's permission to trust myself. A client once asked me if I'd ever confronted Elliot properly. If I'd ever demanded answers or made him acknowledge what he'd done. I'd thought about it sometimes. Imagined the conversation. All the things I'd say. All the ways I'd make him understand. But I'd realized something important. The people who hurt you rarely give you the closure you're looking for. They rarely take full responsibility. They rarely say the exact words you need to hear. And waiting for that closure meant giving them power they didn't deserve. So instead of confronting Elliot, I'd built a life that didn't include him. Instead of forcing my family to acknowledge what they'd done, I'd created a new definition of family with people who actually saw me. Instead of proving I wasn't crazy, I'd simply stopped caring what people who'd never loved me properly thought about my sanity. That was my closure. Not dramatic. Not satisfying in the way movies make it look. But real. And lasting. And entirely mine. If someone asked me now what I'd learned from everything that happened, I'd tell them this. You don't need people to admit they hurt you for it to be real. You don't need permission to protect yourself. You don't need to make yourself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. And you don't need to keep people in your life just because they're family or because you have history or because leaving feels like giving up. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes the strongest choice is building something new. Sometimes healing looks like a quiet apartment and meaningful work and a small circle of people who actually see you. Not everyone gets a dramatic victory. Not everyone gets vindication. Not everyone gets the apology they deserve. But everyone can choose themselves. Everyone can decide that peace matters more than being proven right. Everyone can build a life that feels true, even if it looks nothing like what they planned. I thought I was supposed to have a wedding and a husband and a place in my mother's carefully constructed world. Instead, I had a practice that helped people, work that mattered, and a sense of self I'd never had before. The trade was worth it. Every difficult moment. Every painful realization. Every time I had to choose myself when it would have been easier to fold. Worth it. Because I'd found something I'd been searching for my whole life without knowing it. Not love from people who couldn't give it. Not approval from people who'd never be satisfied. But something quieter and more sustaining. Respect for myself. Trust in my own perceptions. Peace in my own company. And the absolute certainty that I would never again make myself small for someone else's comfort. That certainty felt like coming home. Like finding solid ground after years of quicksand. Like breathing deeply for the first time in a long time. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too suspicious, too much, remember this. The people who benefit from your silence will always question your reality. Your job isn't to convince them. Your job is to trust yourself enough to walk away from anyone who makes you doubt what you know to be true. Peace isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet boundaries, a smaller circle, and the courage to build a life that's actually yours. Thank you for listening to Zariah's story. If it resonated with you, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please share it with them. Sometimes we all need the reminder that walking away can be the strongest thing we do.